President Trump's decision to withdraw American forces from northeastern Syria blindsided the Pentagon, allies, and lawmakers on both sides of the aisle. It also brought up a big question. Could this pave the way for an ISIS resurgence? The controversial move by the Trump administration enables Turkey to launch a military offensive against Kurdish fighters in northern Syria. The Kurds, who make up the majority of the Syrian Democratic Forces, or the SDF, have been one of the U.S.'s biggest allies in the fight against ISIS, from clearing towns to guarding ISIS prisoners. So, how big is the ISIS threat in the region? And can the Kurds manage the threat on their own? Well, the president and the U.S. military seem to have different viewpoints. President Trump has repeatedly claimed that ISIS has been defeated in the region.
In the Middle East, our brave warriors have liberated virtually 100% of ISIS in Iraq and Syria. Now, you don't hear that from these people.
It's true the SDF did take back Raqqa, the city that was considered the center of the ISIS caliphate. But one thing is clear. The U.S. military doesn't think ISIS has been totally wiped out, and also doesn't think that the SDF is ready to take on ISIS entirely on its own. In fact, in a quarterly report on the operation to fight ISIS in Syria and Iraq, the lead inspector general said that ISIS started to have a resurgence in Syria after the U.S. reduced its forces there this past summer. I called Seth Jones from the Center for Strategic and International Studies to better understand how the SDF would fare without U.S. support.
Syria itself is and remains an area with significant terrorist sanctuary. But what the Islamic State has done is they've developed what they call a desert or Sahara strategy. It's shifted to a longer-term guerrilla campaign.
What is the likelihood of a resurgence of the Islamic State?
First of all, the Islamic State is already resurging, meaning it's conducting attacks. I think the more the Islamic State is able to operate in areas with limited Syrian government or other activities that push back against it, we can expect a resurgence of the Islamic State. It has done that repeatedly, either in its current form or in its Al-Qaeda in Iraq form. So I would say there's a better than 50-50 chance we'll see the Islamic State eventually retake some territory in Syria or Iraq.
It's also unclear what will happen to members of ISIS that still remain in the region. Right now, the Kurdish forces are guarding thousands of ISIS terrorists. The U.S. Department of Defense has warned that the SDF has limited capacity to guard these prisoners on their own. And officials have sounded the alarm about the possibility that ISIS could try to plan some mass prison breaks. How does the management of the thousands of ISIS prisoners work when the Kurds are left alone to do the job?
I think it raises major concerns about how long this is going to continue for and how many of these fighters are eventually going to be set free. I mean, this problem is likely to get more serious rather than better with a U.S. departure.
And none of this takes into account the almost 70,000 people living in a refugee camp in northern Syria, which contains ISIS families. The Pentagon says ISIS is actively recruiting new members there, and that it had, quote, few resources to monitor the camp directly, and that the SDF was only capable of providing, quote, minimal security. According to the report, this in turn has, quote, created conditions that allow ISIS ideology to spread uncontested in the camp.
You have a large number of people, including young men, that are stuck at camps like Al-Hol and are, every indication is that are getting increasingly angry about their situation, which has raised concerns about youth radicalization.
The White House says Turkey will now be responsible for the captured ISIS members in the region, but it's not entirely clear how, or if it's even possible for that to happen.
One major takeaway right now is that the U.S. is in the process of abandoning Syria with no explanation for why it's doing it. This is a particularly egregious case because the U.S. has provided training to Kurdish forces. They've been left out to hang against a potential Turkish offensive.
I reached out to CENTCOM for comment, and they referred me to a formal statement made by the Defense Press Secretary that the DoD, quote, does not endorse a Turkish operation in northern Syria, and that U.S. forces won't support or be involved in any such operation. There are a lot of unanswered questions about what the American withdrawal from northeastern Syria will actually look like. But one thing is for certain, the Syrian Kurds, who have long fought besides the U.S., will now be at the center of this discussion.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.